After a screen has been exposed using an exposure unit, it is time to actually wash out the screen and reveal our stencil. Now, washing out a screen is really not exactly the most easiest thing, especially when you're using higher mesh screens and artwork that has a lot of detail. So it is very important that this process be done kind of slowly and by someone with some good amount of experience to avoid, again, potentially hurting our stencil in any way. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the screen wet by using just a power washer. By getting the screen wet, the emulsion will start to break down wherever the artwork was exposed, or essentially wherever the film positive was on the screen and then light hit it and burned itself in there. So again, we can create our stencil. So the first step, we'll get the screen wet, and then you'll start to see essentially a ghost of the actual artwork start to appearing because the emulsion will start to wear down. So let's turn on our power washer. So we got the print side, now we're going to go on to the squeegee side. And that's it for the moment. Now realize that breaking down the emulsion that was exposed is a chemical process. So we cannot just essentially keep applying a ton of water and expect to be able to wash out this design successfully. We must respect the chemical process of the emulsion needs a little bit of time to actually work its way out. Now, when it comes to exposing a screen, it in itself is very much an art. And if you don't have the right exposure times, it can make this entire step much more difficult than it needs to be. So take the time to find the perfect exposure times for every type of screen mesh that your shop uses, with the type of emulsion, the typical amount of emulsion that you coat onto the screen, and then the exposure unit itself, and even the power washer. There are so many variables that go into how long to expose the actual screen and be able to wash it out successfully. And by using a 21-step sensitivity guide and also exposure calculators, you can really calculate the exact time that you need to wash out the design. This will again allow you to hold all of that fine detail that you really want, and again, not essentially ruin the stencil in any way, which again is going to virtually make it useless. Now, if you don't expose the screen for the right amount of time, one of two things are essentially going to happen. You're either going to underexpose it or you're going to overexpose it. If you underexpose the screen, all of the artwork will wash out way too easily. And the inside of it will be very slimy. That means that again, when I go to push it out, it'll be very easy to remove all the emulsion that was burned and make our stencil, but all of the emulsion around it isn't going to be really that sturdy, and it's going to be pushed out as well when I'm hitting it with the power washer. Now, if I overexpose it or essentially expose it for too long of time, it becomes much more difficult to essentially wash out the design. It's very different. If you overexpose it, again, it can lead to just the similar problems as under, and it's just not going to work. So respect the chemistry and realize that every mesh emulsion type, exposure unit, power washer, and everything in between is going to affect the exposure time. So dial them in from the get-go and you will have a lot less problems when it goes to actually washing out the artwork. Now, again, this is typically going to take several minutes for the artwork to be able to start working its way out and for us to be able to be pushing it. And the print side, because when we coated the screen, we stored it bookshelf. All of the emulsion essentially gets pulled down to what is called the print side. And so this side of the screen is holding a lot more emulsion than the squeegee side. So when I go to finally wash out this design, I don't typically do much on this side whatsoever because it is essentially just too brittle. We want to blow out the rest of the artwork from this side only. So again, sometimes it's going to take several more minutes, but let's see what we got. And that's all there is to it, to creating a stencil that we can then use. It's very important that when you're using the power washer that you not get too close to the screen and apply too much pressure, as this will create problems with the emulsion. And also make sure you're using an electric power washer that's not going to be over 1500 psi, as too much pressure will cause all types of problems. Once you have washed out the design, you now need to dry it. And if you have a screen dryer, that's going to be the most optimal way. You can also kind of get as much water out of the screen a couple different ways. One, you can use what is called a squeegee, and you can squeegee the water off of both sides of the screen. Or secondly, you can use an air compressor, throw some air on the screen and just blow out as much water as possible, and then throw it into your screen dryer so that it can quickly dry using heat and a little bit of air. If you have any questions on how to wash out a screen or anything else related to the screen printing process, please do not hesitate to contact me.